Yeah, no, I think that's pretty much the reading. I mean, one of the things that's very frustrating about the way in which they record votes is not just that they sometimes get them wrong first time, as Ione was saying, but also they don't tell you why people weren't there. And so you've got some people who may just not have been around, though they did go to the lengths of bringing the climate change minister back from absolutely sort of crucial hours at COP28. And I think he's going back again this evening, so he's got a bit of a bad day. But there's some people here who you would definitely think are in the sort of more likely to be in the One Nation camp, some who clearly were part of the faction seeing Rishi Sunak this morning, who were liable to vote against because they didn't think the bill was tough enough, and some people who may just have been unavailable. They might have been at the COP or something else. So it's a bit difficult to judge, but it doesn't look on the face of it as though the rebellion is that much bigger than the number of people who rebelled against the government on the Windsor Framework, which was the sort of last sort of Brexity, if you like, test we had of Rishi Sunak's premiership. But there, of course, he was never in any danger at all because Labour voted for it, and Labour's not going to bail him out on this again. So
that's interesting. Jill has just called it Brexity. Claire, is there a feeling, is there a Brexity type feeling to today in terms of the feel of it, the sort of the back rooms and the meetings and the anxiety and the early breakfasts and all sorts?
Absolutely. I was in Parliament all of today, and it had exactly that feel of the Theresa May era when we were doing rounds and rounds of indicative voting on Brexit, where there was anger outside the Palace of Westminster, anger inside the Palace of Westminster. And you certainly did see those groups of people sitting around at coffee tables, chatting in corridors, suddenly sneaking off around a corner to have a chat with somebody else. So there were lots of groups, there was lots of activity, and it certainly had that feel of the slight sense of foreboding at one point, where it felt a very, very febrile atmosphere. And then there was a thunderstorm in amongst all of it. So it's the kind of thing that when you're in that bubble, you really do get caught up in it. And I think some people don't quite understand that if you've never been there, but you can feel the tension in the air. So it was very much like those dark days of Brexit. It brought it all back.
And there was a lot of politics going on today, Jill, a lot of politics going on today. And yourself and Claire will understand that better than I will. But I pride myself in my maths. And here's the bit you're going to have to explain to me. There's in and around 100 Conservative MPs who will not tolerate, and their words, by the way, one of them said this, they will not tolerate the bill moving even 1 millimetre further to the right. And then there's these groups of Conservative MPs who will not vote for it in its current state. I can't work out mathematically. That's so straightforward, Jill. Why does politics matter here? Where's the right wiggle room? I can't see any break in that status quo from what everybody's saying from the various facets of the Conservative Party.
I don't think there's any sort of amendment that can placate the people who think this isn't tough enough, where if the One Nation Conservatives who've said that this is as far as they can go and they're not going an inch further, if you end up with that, then the Prime Minister really is stuck very badly, because half his party, or big wing of his party, is saying you've got to toughen this up or we won't vote for it. The other ones are saying not an inch further or we won't vote for it. And he knows Labour are going to vote against. There's no point going hunting for Labour votes here. So he's in a real problem area. The one thing he has to hope for is that ultimately some of those people don't go through with their threats, that, the One Nation side of the Conservatives maybe more in favour of party unity, loyalty. They're all coming up to an election. So maybe they don't press their objections. They just convince themselves that they can live with this little amendment more, if that's what Rishi Sunak has to do. Equally, on the other side, maybe they say, well, actually, it's this Rwanda bill or no Rwanda bill. And we'd actually rather give this one a shot, even if we don't think that it does close off all the routes of appeal. Let's give this a shot. And if we win that election, We can put in some tough stuff in the manifesto. We can put in leaving the European Convention on Human Rights maybe in the manifesto, see whether everybody would stand on that platform. And if we do that, we can come back with a mandate to put through the sort of asylum law that we really want to see. So I think it's really interesting. I mean, what the Prime Minister's bought himself is some more time, but he's bought himself some more time for more arguments, more plotting over Christmas between all these WhatsApp groups, and with members coming back perhaps with very different views of what their constituencies are telling them they have to do, but likely in entrenched positions. We know Theresa May, going back to Brexit again, pulled the December vote when she thought she wouldn't win, and then came back to the biggest ever defeat that Parliament's seen.
A reminder to all MPs, whether they're in government or in opposition, back up those WhatsApp messages. You never know when they're going to be needed. Claire, you've been in Parliament all day, right? You're a former Conservative special advisor.
Yeah.
Do what, without hyperbole, because it's for you, I know you're not going to push it too far. To what level are the Conservative Party divided now? What would you compare it to as a former special advisor, someone who's still in and around Parliament all today?
Yeah, I probably don't have to be as careful as you think. This is the most broken that I have ever seen it. I mean, there were times during the Brexit years where you had two sides and it was almost never the twain shall meet. But now you've got 5 groups, very disparate groups of individuals who almost believe themselves to be bigger than the party. And I think this is the real problem facing Rishi Sunak is, and Jill is right, how do you appease one side or the other? And you aren't going to. I think it's going to come down to the groups, and do they really have the will to bring down the government? Do they have the will to make Rishi Sunak go to the country a lot sooner than perhaps they wish? And do they have the backbone to actually stand up and deliver what they say? Because at one point you can stand there at a press conference on the street and speak very tough, but when push comes to shove, you don't act in the way that you've just described. So I think sometimes there's an awful lot of posturing that goes on. Their opinion is put out there. It is on the record for everybody to see, but they haven't necessarily backed that up with action, but they would always justify it with another reason. So I have never seen it quite this bad. I really hope that they can find a way of coalescing around a single point, because broken parties do not win elections.
And we know what all the polls tell us at the moment, or where they are. Jill, could you then, to finish, Jill Rutter, just give us that bigger picture? I mean, I think the longer you wait, the bigger the win and the bigger the defeat. The more headlines there is between now and the new year, the bigger this story becomes. It becomes about even more than this really important bill. So that's part of it for sure. But do you think, take me inside it a bit more just to finish, are there groups within the Conservative Party thinking beyond the next election at the moment anyway?
Well, I think Claire is more expert about the inside of the Conservative Party than I am. But I think the really interesting thing is how big both sides have let this issue become. You could understand almost feeling that Brexit was more important than party for people for whom, the UK's membership of the EU was abhorrent. It had been something that they'd been, working to diminish and then to extricate the UK from for years and years and years. You could see that became a sort of existential issue. The Rwanda scheme, after all, is a small plank in a government plan to try to tackle illegal migration. And, one of the things that must be frustrating the Prime Minister, though to a large extent it's his fault by overclaiming what he could do in his slogan, certainly frustrating the Home Secretary, who's been trying to talk down the Rwanda plan as that important, saying, it's not the be-all and end-all of this policy. There are other things we're trying to do. We've got our treaty with Rwanda that we can try to do some things with. We've got, our returns agreement with Albania. We can try and do a better deal with the French and get more action. And there are some people clearly who've moved on from Brexit to say, ultimately, we have to push this because it's all about the European Convention on Human Rights. But the Rwanda scheme doesn't seem to me to be something worth breaking your party in two over. But Claire would probably be better placed than me to judge it. And I think it's amazing how this issue, maybe by overplaying on both sides within the Conservative Party, has become such a big dividing line.
Claire, just pick up off the bat, dot the I's and cross the T's for me on what Jill was saying, and then I promise I'll let you both go.
And Jill is she's really correct with what she says on this has become a big issue and it really needn't have done. And unfortunately, sometimes this happens, and I think some of it stems back to 2019 when a lot of new MPs were elected. We then went into COVID lockdown. That might not seem relevant, but when you're a new MP, you really need to bond with your party. You need to understand how Parliament works. You need to talk to varying different colleagues to really get to grips with what you're dealing with. And they didn't have that. So I think this is part of the reason why groups like the New Conservatives have felt emboldened to step up and step out and be more outspoken than perhaps other intakes would. So I think that is one part of it. And I think that immigration has just become this enormous political football, which is being used as a slogan gatherer, as a great big headline generator without anything being done. But unfortunately, the public are not going to accept that for too much longer. They have been promised so much and delivered so little that to put it front and centre was always going to be the biggest mistake.
And a big risk, yeah. Claire Purcell, Jill Rutter, love to chat. Thank you so much for your time.